All right, everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to get into something pretty heavy, honestly, divorce law.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that I think a lot of people, have had experience with, either personally or know people. It's a difficult topic.
It really is. And it's one of those things, I think, where people just don't realize how complicated it can be until they're in the thick of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there's this kind of misconception out there that, oh, you could just do it yourself. You can just file the paperwork. It's not a big deal.
Right. DIY divorce, just download the forms.
Yeah, but what we're going to be looking at today is why that's actually a really bad idea in a lot of cases.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be diving into a video called "Why You Need a Divorce Lawyer" and how to choose the right one. It's by the legal strategist, and yeah, I mean, I think this is something that can really help people out there who are, maybe considering going through this process or are in the middle of it and just, need a little guidance.
Absolutely.
So I guess one of the things that struck me right off the bat in this video was this statistic that they mentioned. Apparently something like 43% of DIY divorce cases end up back in court.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge number.
That's a huge number. And it just goes to show, that there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Right. There's a lot of, legal nuances and kind of pitfalls that you can fall into if you don't have someone who really knows what they're doing to guide you through the process.
Yeah. And I mean, like, what kind of things, specifically? What are some of the common mistakes that people make?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is just not understanding all the paperwork. I mean, you've got things like property division, alimony, child custody, visitation schedules, and these are all incredibly detailed and they have long-term ramifications.
Oh, yeah.
So, if you miss something and you don't fill something out correctly, it can really come back to bite you later on.
Right. And it's not like, filling out the wrong form at the DMV where you can just go back and fix it. This is serious stuff.
Exactly. And another thing that people often overlook is that divorce laws vary significantly from state to state.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, what might work in California might not fly in New York, for example.
Yeah. Well, actually, speaking of that, the video actually highlights California and New York as kind of examples. California has this no-fault system, which I think most people are familiar with, but New York has this thing called equitable distribution, which sounds a little more complicated.
Yeah, equitable distribution can be a little bit tricky. It basically means that the court will try to divide the couple's assets in a way that's fair, but that doesn't necessarily mean 50-50.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just like cutting everything down the middle.
No, not necessarily. Like, for example, let's say one spouse stayed home to raise the kids while the other one went to work and built up a successful business.
Okay, yeah.
Well, in New York, a judge might take that into consideration and award a larger share of the assets to the spouse who put their career on hold.
Ah, I see. So it's really about kind of, looking at the whole picture and figuring out what's actually equitable.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have a lawyer who understands these state-specific nuances.
Right, right. Because, I mean, you could end up, getting a really raw deal if you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly.
But, okay, so let's say, you've decided, okay, I definitely need a lawyer. How do you even go about finding the right one? I mean, there's got to be like a million divorce lawyers out there.
Yeah, there are a lot. I think the first thing is, don't just go with the first lawyer you find.
Yeah.
Do your research. Ask around for recommendations from people you trust.
Okay.
Check out online reviews.
Yeah.
And it's really important to find someone who specializes in divorce cases in your specific state.
Right. So not just like a general, family law attorney or something.
Yeah. Right. You want someone who really knows the ins and outs of divorce law in your jurisdiction.
Okay. And then, once you've kind of narrowed it down to a few potential candidates, what kind of questions should you be asking them?
Well, I think it's really important to be upfront about your concerns and ask very specific questions.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're worried about hidden assets, ask them how they would go about uncovering those.
Yeah.
If you're anticipating a custody battle, ask them about their experience with those kinds of cases.
Okay.
And I think it's also really important to ask about their fees and how they bill.
Right.
You don't want any surprises down the road.
Definitely.
And the other thing I would say is pay attention to how they communicate with you.
Oh, yeah.
Do they listen to you? Do they answer your questions clearly?
Right.
Do they make you feel comfortable?
Yeah.
Because ultimately you want someone who you can trust and who you feel good working with.
Yeah, because this is a very personal, thing to be going through.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that, a good lawyer can be more than just a legal representative. They can also be a source of support and guidance during a really difficult time.
Right?
And that's something that the video kind of touched on. They talked about the lawyer being like an emotional bodyguard.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point. I mean, it makes sense, right? Because you're going through all this emotional turmoil, and it's easy to make decisions that you might regret later on.
Exactly.
So having someone there who can kind of, keep you grounded and help you think clearly is really valuable.
Right. And I think, a good lawyer will also help you understand the long-term implications of the decisions you're making.
Right.
Because divorce isn't just about the here and now, it's about setting yourself up for the future.
Exactly. Well, I think this has been a really, insightful conversation, and I hope it's been helpful for our listeners who are maybe, going through this process or thinking about going through it.
I hope so too.
It's definitely a complex and challenging thing to deal with. But I think the key takeaway here is that, having the right legal guidance can really make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And maybe as a final thought for our listeners, as you're thinking about all of this, what personal qualities beyond just their expertise would make you feel truly supported and empowered by your lawyer during this process?
That's a great question to think about. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.